Hi, on behalf of American Indo-Pacific Forum, greetings to all of you from all around the world. Today we have a very interesting discussion about Indian democracy, whether it is vibrant or it is backsliding. And we are very thankful to the esteemed panelists. We're going to have a fantastic discussion, and the discussion will be moderated by Dr. Adityanji. But before we begin, a quick introduction about American Indo-Pacific Forum. This forum was founded under the leadership of Mr. Shekhar Tiwari, who is a well known figure in the field of geopolitics. And this is the brainchild of a couple of different organizations that wanted to have an esteemed think tank that works on both sides of the aisle between India and US. So there is a grand vision that is in place, that is work in progress, where the think tank will be stationed both in New Delhi and Washington, D.C. Sparing all the details, let me have the pleasure of introducing the esteemed Dr. Adityanji, who is the president of Council for Strategic Affairs and ICHRRF. So, Dr. Adityanji is the president and chairperson of the board of directors of the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. His other interests include international relations and strategic studies. He is the founding president of the Council for Strategic Affairs, a think tank. Dr. Adityanji is a practicing psychiatrist who has worked as a clinician and psychiatrist in 4 different countries on 3 different continents. He has interacted with people from various ethnic, racial, religious, social, and cultural backgrounds over his 40 years of experience as a psychiatrist. He's passionately interested in the cultural, spiritual, religious, and human rights of various marginalized and persecuted minorities worldwide. During his student life, as a young medical student, he was involved with human rights organizations like Amnesty International and People's Union for Civil Liberties, PUCL. He has also worked on several resettlement projects on rehabilitation of Bhutanese refugees in the US. He has published his articles and op ed pieces on various platforms. With that, we welcome you, Dr. Adityanji. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Sivakumar Rajgopalan. It's indeed a pleasure to be on this august platform of American Indo-Pacific Forum. And we are truly blessed to have a distinguished panel with combined wisdom of almost 150 years. We have very strong panelists, and I will introduce them. And I won't be afraid to say that they come from very elitist background. 3 of my distinguished panelists are from the famous Jawaharlal Nehru University. And the 4th one is from the most sought after college in India, St. Stephen's College from Delhi University. Again, 3 of my panelists are Bihar Putras. So I am going to introduce them, starting with Mr. Yashwant Raj. Mr. Yashwant Raj is a US correspondent for multiple Indian news organizations, which include Indo-Asian News Service and Dainik Bhaskar. He holds a postgraduate degree from St. Stephen's College from Delhi University. He was previously the editor of Hindustan Times in North America, and he is basically Bihar Putra, born in Pataliputra. If I have to use just one expression to describe and introduce Yashwant Raj, it would be a journalist par excellence. That's his introduction in one phrase. My second panelist is Dr. Anju Preet. Dr. Anju Preet is the Vice President of National Council of Asian Indian Associations. She is also the President of Hum Watan. A little bit about her background. She is Haryana ki beti, Haryana Putri. She is an adjunct faculty at the Georgetown University, a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University and Georgetown University. She got her postdoc from Harvard University. She is extensively published. You just have to Google her name in PubMed, LinkedIn, and academia.net, and you will get all her scientific publications. She is a community leader from Washington, D.C. area. I believe in her student life, she was affiliated with Akhil Bhartiya Vidyarthi Parishad and is an active member of various social and cultural non-profit organizations. A founder of Hum Watan, an organization she was the pioneer to celebrate the first International Day of Yoga at the mall in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Dr. Anju Preet. Our next distinguished speaker is Mr. Avtans Kumar. Avtans is a columnist for the Sunday Guardian. He is president and trustee of Indica Inc. He is a columnist and linguist who writes frequently for various media outlets. He is also a Bihar Putra from Pataliputra. He studied at Jawaharlal Nehru University and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he taught linguist and Hindi as a foreign language respectively. So if I may use a terminology, he is an HMT, Hindi medium type. As a trustee, he leads the operations in Indic Academy Incorporated as Indica, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. This organization seeks to preserve India's traditional institutions, knowledge, and practices, protect her identity against distortions, and promote Indic thought to local and global consumers, practitioners, and seekers. Avtans received the San Francisco Press Club's Journalists Excellence Award in 2022, 2023, 2021. His creation, The Flight of Deities, an anthology of desecration and devotion, was published in 2023. And I can share some glory by association. Along with him, I am also a columnist for the Sunday Guardian. So welcome, Avtans.
Namaste.
I don't see our last panelist, Mr. Satish Jha. I don't know whether he's joined or not, but I will go ahead and introduce him at this stage so that I don't have to repeat it. Mr. Satish Jha is the chairman of the Jha Group. He's an investor and philanthropist. He was the co-founder of Janasatta, the Hindi daily of the Indian Express Group. He was former editor of Dinman, a Hindi weekly, or as we used to call Saptahik, news weekly of the Times of India Group, a former advisor of technology and policy to Dr. Manmohan Singh, Secretary General, the South Commission. He is the chairperson of the Jha Energy, Pinewood Systems, and others. He holds an MA degree in economics from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and his subsequent education was at multiple universities at various prestigious schools like Fletcher and Tufts. He's also a Bihar Putra. And if I have to use a single phrase to describe Mr. Satish Jha, he is a serial social entrepreneur. So with that introduction of all my distinguished panelists, I feel delighted to start this conversation. Each of the distinguished panelists will get 5 minutes to make an opening statement. Once the opening statements are done, we will have a moderated discussion, and moderated discussion will be followed by some questions and answers from our audience who will be sending the questions. My humble request with folded hands to my distinguished panelists is that please don't exceed your time. Please be aware of the time. If you do your opening statement in 4 minutes, I'll be very happy. But I would not like anyone crossing 5 minutes because that will take away the time from much more thoughtful and considered discussion. So I'll start with inviting Mr. Yashwant Raj to give his opening statement first. Mr. Yashwant
Thank,
Raj.
thank you so much, thank you so much, Adinji. And once again, greetings to all my fellow panelists on this discussion. And I thank you so much for start kicking it off with me. And but I would like to state at the outset, whatever views I will uh, present are mine only and not of my news organizations or any news organization that I represent. And again, I will be speaking kind of as a journalist of more than 30 years. It's very difficult to withdraw from my persona as a journalist. So all my observations will also be as a journalist more than my personal views, which I'm not really sure if anybody is interested in my personal views. And so it's an interesting topic to talk about, especially when we're looking at elections coming up in India, general elections, and all eyes will be on this election as to what will happen for the next 5 years in Delhi. Will will the Prime Minister return for another term of 5 years, or will there be somebody else, some other equation, some other party combination, one party, two parties, many multiple parties? So I suppose we will all be talking about elections, democracy, as we in the weeks going forward. Uh, I do think that, and I've covered elections in India and I've covered elections in the United States, and I do think we have a vibrant, really robust democracy election system. Where democracy, by definition, is ruled by people, governed by people, of the people, and by the people, and uh, we have kind of been doing that for many years now, and I do think we can argue with some satisfaction that we have institutionalized representative democracy in terms of elections, and barring a few times, which are really rare exceptions, when elections were not held, and we all know what I'm talking about. But by and large, we have held elections in time every year, year after year. And that in itself is an achievement. Don't forget, we are only uh, 70, 80 years old. And compared to the United States or United Kingdom, uh, as democracies goes, we are still a baby. And But it's a remarkable achievement what we have done with our elections. And once again, as you all are aware of, there was a time when elections were really raucous, loud, loudspeakers, a lot of buntings, a lot of money display, etc., etc., booth capturing. I mean, all of us have heard of that. As a reporter, as a journalist, I've seen that happen uh, when bogus votes were like stamped in the voting room, in the voting booth by either party, whichever candidate, etc. And we have all been through that. And from then to now, electronic voting. I'm afraid I haven't voted in India in a while, but it is so remarkably smooth, the voting process in India. I would imagine in some rural areas, some remote areas, things could be a little more chaotic than they are in cities. But voting in India is such a pleasure, and in terms of just the exercising your casting your vote, that itself. So I think that's a remarkable achievement where we are now in terms of elections, holding free and fair elections. Always there will always be allegations and claims of rigging, and I mean we all know what's happening in the United States for the last 4 years. One party has talked about nothing else but election fraud when there wasn't any. So, but that apart, but we talk about these things in India as well, and there are always allegations and complaints. But I just think it's part of the competitive process that elections are, and they're intensely competitive. The rivalries are sometimes go generations deep. So I suppose there's certainly a lot at stake that there will never be a happy outcome for, especially the losers. So the losing party will complain about elections being rigged, or malpractices were seen or displayed. Having said that, I mean, and that I said in the beginning, that is a great achievement. I mean, we just have to look at India's neighborhood, and how elections have been such a slippery affair. Look at Pakistan. I mean, look at so what we have achieved in India, and I hate to compare India with Pakistan now, but that's just as a context as to what we have achieved. Now, having said that, so democracy is also about what happens between elections. Uh, it is when the government in power, in office, uh, has a responsibility uh, to allow some transparency, accountability. You can argue that accountability is there because I mean, if the government doesn't perform, they can be voted out the next elections. So there is accountability, but I think there have been issues about transparency. There have been issues about rights, minority rights, etc. All these things, I think, are part of the evolution of Indian democracy, the way we're growing, the way we're evolving. These are very robust issues that we discuss, and with some passion on both sides, which is really good, which is what democracy is all about. That you should be able to present your views as passionately as you can, and you should be allowed to do that, and that happens. There will, there is, I think, there is, there's nobody stopping you from saying what you want to on whichever channel. I mean, government can technically ban you from coming on in one of those established news channels or write something in newspaper. But in this age and time of free internet, in terms of you can post what you want on YouTube, on X, which used to be previously Twitter, Facebook. I mean, you can put forth your views in any way which you can, any way which you want. So. To be denied your freedom to express yourself is not as easy anymore. I mean, there was a time when you could be stopped, not anymore. I mean, if you really want to say something, you will go on YouTube, or you can go on social media, any other social media platform, and say your piece. So, but again, as I said, these are growing issues. I mean, as I said, I compared Indian democracy to a baby compared to the American democracy and elsewhere. But these are growing issues, and as India grows as a country, as a nation, so will its a democracy and its democratic values, and we will institutionalize more and more of what is it is very dear and about democracy, its values and its principles. And I do look forward to the discussion now. I think Dr. Intenji was very clear. 4 minutes and five if possible, but I think I've said my piece. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Yashwant Raj, for very, very sober, very sophisticated observations on historical evolution of Indian democracy and electoral system. I would invite our only female panelist at this time, Dr. Anjupreet. Dr. Anjupreet, kindly unmute yourself, and you have 5 minutes to give your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Adityanji, for having me here among these esteemed panelists. They have much more experience of the current political system, and they have lived in these democracies longer than I have been. So that technically I'm much younger than. So my experiences may not be as extensive they have, and going from the laypersons or views as a nationalist, I call myself, and having lived in both India and USA, and I'm very fortunate to be part of these two great democracies, and India has. Is a beautiful democracy, the largest democracy, and as Yashwantji mentioned, that elections have been held. It's an institutionalized democracy in the country, so we are proud as a country. India is can take pride in, like, we had even movies made where how the last person comes out to vote, like from the election bodies, they go to the forest for the last person to cast the vote, so which means that each and every vote counts. And India has evolved over the years in terms of elections and transparency, but there are still a narrative formed throughout the election process. Whenever we see a new election coming or a change in power happening, be it 2014, 2018, now 2024, or whenever a nationalist government comes in, a some this noise is created that the democracy is in danger. There will be no elections after this term if certain government comes to. But I think that's what the role of opposition is, and that's what the democracy has given us, the freedom of speech, though to a certain extent. But yeah, we are very proud of being in a democratic country, and there are, with the electoral processes and forming a government, different things come in, which we can discuss down the line, like how the political parties, they are not all very clean, and so all those kind of things that comes with the election process. Every party, as Yashwantji says, the losers make the most noise. Yes, they do make the most noise, and but then it depends what level, what kind of ethics those losers are on. Because the BJP government, I'm a pro BJP, as I have been associated with Akhil Bharatiya Vidya Parishad, and it's a right wing nationalist government. So as we see, BJP, though not in majority of the states, the state governments, but looking at that perspective, you can call us losers, but we don't make that kind of noise, which the national losers make all the time, calling all sort of names, and to the elected representative of the head of the, not the head, but the prime minister of the country. Head is always the president, which, though different earlier governments tried to overmine that statutory position of the president. So, but yeah, everybody has a right to speak, and that's what our democracy has given us. And we are very proud and happy to be living in this age and times where we see democracy really taking up shape, and people, as Shekharji mentioned in that in his comment, that democracy forms the government, but uh, is it the government for the people? So yes, democracy by itself, the name is, it is for the people, by the people. So in my opinion, my personal opinion, yes, the current national government or even the state governments, they do represent people's views. But when the people are given the power to vote and choose their representatives, they should be more educated. And that's where India is lacking. It has to go further, because education gives them understanding, and they can form, it's better if they form that informed decision, because they are choosing the government, they are making the country. So education, knowledge is still lacking at the root level, and the reasons for people to choose their representatives, we may deny it, but still it goes to castes, which caste and love. In this era, some parties are pushing that we should have a caste-based survey. Not, it should not be caste. Which era are you living in? Educate people to make the right decisions, so they can form the right and accountable government. So I'm sorry I didn't keep track of the time. So Aditya, let me
Yeah,
know.
you have finished your five
Okay,
minutes.
thank you, thank you, appreciate it. So that's what I would say. More education, better the democracy is, and we are heading towards more educated democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Anjupreet. Uh, I think your observations were very, very pertinent for future, how we evolve the democracy in future. It's my pleasure now to invite Mr. Avtans Kumar, who is one of our distinguished panelists, and he's a very well-known person. So, Avtansji, please go ahead.
Namaste. Thank you once again for inviting me, and thank you all my panelists. I'm blessed and privileged to be in this august company. And so, before I start, the question is democracy in India backsliding? And let me put it very bluntly and very openly right in the front that it's not. Indian democracy is vibrant, and it is the most representative democracy over time it has become. And the reason for that is that democracy is our civilizational ethos. It is, we have been for the longest period of time, over 5,000 years, it is the most pluralistic, most democratic society in the world, the most democratic civilization, with the theme of when we have Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti, that takes care of a lot of what we think of in terms of democracy in the modern days. So, but then coming to the question, it presupposes two things here when we talk of democracy and backsliding. So it presupposes that we all understand democracy in the same way all across the world. Is that true? And then, if that is true or not true, how is it judged? When we talk of backsliding, it also presupposes that we are somehow we are judging the democracies across the world by certain parameters and all. How is that parameter? Is it objective? Does it do a good job? And the third part that I'll briefly touch upon is, if these things are not working, do we have an alternative? And my supposition, my submission will be, yes, we have another alternative. So I'll quickly talk about it. So what we mean by democracy, like Tiwari earlier said, it's a government by participation, government by people. Well, that's fine. And that there are also, but it's a concept. It's an abstract concept, and it is realized in different ways when people go and vote freely, when people are able to express their views freely. So those are some of the concrete measures that we can accept. But how is it seen? Is it seen differently in different parts of the world? I mean, we know both of us, all of us here are from India. That's the largest democracy. And then we are here, some of us are here in the US, that's called the oldest democracy of the world. They are both democracies, but they are very different. India has the parliamentary form of government. US has presidential form of government. India has majoritarian democracy. US has republican form of democracy. So we don't choose president, for example, in the US, whoever gets the most vote. It's the electoral system, and people don't understand, a lot of people. But in India, whoever gets the majority vote, it's not even 50%. So how is it realized? And then we also have a democracy in the UK there where there is a monarchy. So these are all different forms of democracy, and we have to see it in different forms all along. Um, Also, we have to think that when we judge the democracies in different countries, what are the expectations from democracy from the people who elect their governments? Well, for example, in the US, we have Second Amendment rights. It is expected of us to carry bear arms. Okay, is it same parameter that we will judge in Indian democracy? No, but in India right now, the some of the issues that affect the electorates, by which they judge how good their democracy is, whether they have access to bank account, whether they have access to gas cylinder, whether they have access to electricity, whether they have access to toilet. These things don't come into picture when we talk of democracy in the so-called Western countries. Then we also have the issue of, uh, you know, if is the Western democracy the democracy? And I would submit that it's not necessarily. Uh, if I remember Maharshi Aurobindo's quote, he talks about uh, the dharmic democracy. That is, he says, the future of Asiatic countries, including India. So the alternative that I was talking about has to be a dharma based democracy where there is no antagonism between duties and rights. The Western democracy is more about rights than duties, whereas dharma is more about duties.
Thank you,
So,
Avthanji. You have finished your 5 minutes.
okay, thank you. All right,
Very
I'll be
beautiful
more. Yeah.
vision of an alternative model of dharma-based democracy. I think it's something intellectual that we need to really ponder over. It's my honor and delight to invite our last distinguished panelist, Mr. Satish Jha. I don't know whether he was hearing the introduction when I introduced him. He is an entrepreneur with a social conscience. So, Mr. Jha, the floor is yours.
Dr. Aditya, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sorry I was a few minutes late. I was in some meeting. I think my view is this. Ultimately, democracy is about the citizens. How do citizens feel about something? And if you see from that point of view, let's look at what society India is today. We are a nation where 8% people have passed high school. We are a nation where more than 50% people still are below $1,000 per capita income. We are a nation where at least one third of society is at $200 per capita income. And these are the real facts of life that we deal with. In that society, what kind of democracy can we expect? So people who understand power, they understand how to amass power. And in that process, they do everything possible to leverage the institutions of democracy and achieve power, and then do what they think is right, depending on where their loyalties belong or where their interests belong. So what we have achieved is at this point in time, we surely have an electoral democracy of a certain kind, where electoral process itself is under question. But don't forget, there was a time when we used to have a single day vote, and results were out. Counting used to take a little longer than the voting, but the results were out after 1 or 1.5 days, and we understood that. Today, after electronic voting, we spread the whole thing over a whole month, and then the results are not quite out. Whole month-long election process. What has happened? We have not leveraged even the electronic process in the way it should be, and there is a question about the whole electronic process, how reliable it is, how robust it is. Can we really accept the results it gives us? That's the challenge. But more important, democracy functions when institutions which support its structure, they also are intact. Today, the fact is there are questions around media being, excuse me, 90% within the ambit of the executive, judiciary being totally compromised, a citizen being afraid, And those are the kind of challenges, and institutions being leveraged and misused. If you see the results come out, 95% institutions being used against opposition, only 5% for the sake of namesake, just in case when there's no choice against the executive or the political executive that's in power. Many questions are emerging here. So fact is, we can, if you lower the bar, it looks like great democracy. If you just begin to bring it to any level of acceptance, just as where a citizen can feel like a citizen feel like someone who is independent, citizen can feel like someone who's educated and has a power to speak to the power. That process is kind of missing here. 75 years, we have a population which is 3 times the population we inherited independence, which is not literate, not educated, not capable, earns less than, say, about, I would say, 3,000 US dollars a month. This is 92% people. That's what they earn here. And the quality of life, if you're talking about sanitation, calories, and don't forget, 950 million people are being fed today food grains, and this is being stated proudly by the executive. I'm not going to name anyone. Executive says very proudly, that's what we do. If you're feeding 950 million people every day food just for them to survive, is that really a vibrant human society? It sounds like people who survival level society. So those challenges are emerging. At the same time, people who are intellectual, they have different kinds of questions. So if you cut through the whole spectrum and the dozens of layers that you find dozens of definitions of democracy. And as of today, I have only one index. Is a human being, a citizen, afraid of saying or speaking his mind or standing up to the power? I think there are questions about that, serious questions about that. So on the one hand, if I lower the bar, yes, we are a vibrant democracy, no questions about that. If you raise the bar to the level where it should be, there are many questions that emerge. So the question is, where do we set the bar as such? Is it 33% pass mark, or is it 10% pass mark? At 33% pass mark, probably we'll get past some kind of bar of democracy. At 10% mark, we'll look very vibrant democracy. At 45% pass mark, probably we'll definitely fail. That's what it looks like. So I think we should understand we should not lower the bar in judging India. Of course, democracy in that some ways is it a Western concept? Is it a concept which is natural to our society in India? Is evolved from our ancient culture, etc.? Now you can go on debating it, and that debate is very vibrant and good. But when debating, in saying what I want to say, I'm a little afraid of executive. That's not a great place to be. In the America, a woman on the TV camera of CNN can say, George Bush is an idiot because she is a citizen. She doesn't have stakes in George Bush. She can say that. Those with stakes are always afraid. But when the person who has no stakes, he's also afraid. That is a serious point. So I think I would judge a democracy when a person who doesn't have a stake in the system to gain something out of it, if that person is afraid, that's when I think democracy is under question. And I would probably have lost my 5 minutes, Dr. Up, so I leave it to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Jha, for raising very pertinent issues, and I think they will serve in our discussion. So we move on to the moderated discussion phase, and I will have my first question to Mr. Yashwant Raj. Mr. Raj, Satish Jhaji just talked about, people being afraid, not being able to talk or express on TV. Now, you know that India is a union of states, and I'm especially emphasizing that. What would be your observations, very specific observations, on the state of Indian democracy in following 3 states? Number 1, West Bengal. Number 2, Kerala. And number 3, Tamil Nadu. What is happening to the state of democracy if we take freedom of expression or freedom of voting without fear as yardsticks of democracy? Kindly unmute yourself.
Thank you so much for the question, Tintinji. I'm afraid I have really not kept that close an eye on the states of West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala to be able to comment on the lack of democracy or lack of or fear among people to express themselves, vote themselves. So I will have to take a pass, and I'll explain. I'm a journalist who covers the United States for Indian audiences and readers, and so I do spend a lot more time observing what's happening in the US. You could call this a professional hazard, but I am not able to focus as much as uh, I should be to be able to answer your questions about specifically about West Bengal, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. And my apologies for that. But I would address the larger question that you raised about what Mr. Jha was talking about people's freedom to. They're afraid to speak out. There is some truth to what Mr. Jha is saying. There are allegations, and that the freedom to speak and express themselves freely is under threat. But as I said in my opening remarks, uh, people have found a way to get around it, and I'll give you an example of two journalists, at least one journalist who has been very critical of the Modi administration. You know who I'm talking about, Mr. Ravish Kumar. He left NDTV after NDTV changed hands, uh, and he has since then launched a very popular YouTube channel on which he is able to say pretty much what he was saying on his TV. Now you can argue that the reach of his YouTube channel may not be half as much as NDTV is, and etc. So, but he is not. Nobody has been able to silence him. He speaks freely. And he speaks true to the powers, and there are a couple of other people who do that as well. And I am sure you all have followed and heard these journalists give their honest assessment of whatever is happening in India. And if you haven't, then I would strongly recommend do take a look at some of these people and what they're saying, what they're doing. And equally, once again, and I said in the beginning, it's a these are not it's not an easy time to come suppress people from prevent people from expressing their views and stuff, because the opportunities are so wide and so much. You can pick up your phone, record yourself saying what you want and post it, and it will go to people that haven't even heard of you. And if it finds traction with people, and if you what you're saying echoes with what people are thinking, then we all talk about something going viral. And so that is how you are able to circumvent uh, traditional means for of governments to prevent people from speaking. So I
Thank you,
take away.
Mr. Raj. You've gone away from the original question. My second question is for Mr. Jha.
Okay.
What is the most perfect democracy in the world, per your opinion? Is the US democracy the yardstick or the litmus test for comparing with the Indian democracy? If so, why? And if not so, please explain.
Well, I think the US democracy has evolved differently. What we are saying today, vis-a-vis with the two parties, Republican and Democrats, it's very hard to understand how thinking people can believe what they believe on one side and not on the other side. It's very, very difficult to figure out. But nonetheless, there is no state repression about what you say. And that is the essence of democracy to begin with. In the Indian context, even if you put on Facebook posts, people get arrested. Put YouTube, it gets banned. If you put something, it just state insists that it will not be basically addressed at some point in time, or you will be penalized for that. So many things happen in Indian state which are not really typical of a democracy, and that's where the question arises. When I look at from the point of view of the quality of electoral process, how a citizen actually votes, the experience of the US, there's a difference between a dhaba, whether you get a 5 rupee cup of chai, to a five-star hotel where you pay $8 for a cup of coffee. That's the difference between Indian democracy and American democracy. Well, maybe five rupee cooler ki chai is as good as the $8 coffee in a five-star hotel. That's a question we can go on debating. But the fact is that on any spec, except for the fact that the institution of electoral democracy, there is no other similarity that I find anywhere between the US and India. I'm not saying, just like many presidents of America have said, well, democracy may be imperfect, but that's the least imperfect system we know. Probably that's how which we have in American system that keeps on going. In the system, unless and until every person is educated enough to be able to exercise their rights and speak about themselves and stand up to even the local bureaucracy. Here is a system where journalists, before they write a story, are imprisoned for 3 years, and there is no court willing to listen to them. There's a guy from a university who has done nothing wrong in his life. He speaks better than any of us probably will speak about moral values and high standards that we hold. Just because he belongs to a certain community, he's been there. Supreme Court doesn't listen to him as such. There's a person who withdraws his appeal from Supreme Court because he tried 20 times. The court doesn't listen to them. And for no reason, apparent reason whatsoever, when bail is the norm and jail is an exception, in that world, jail has become norm and bail is an exception. Why create such anomalies? Why create such examples which become a kind of black mark on democracy? But the
Thank you,
executive
Mr.
has
Shah.
chosen to
You
do so.
made your point very clear.
Thank you.
And the
Thank you.
reason I cited those three states, that India is not a unitary state, it is a union of states, and there are different standards of democracy in different states. And I can tell you that a university professor, just for forwarding a cartoon of Mamata Bandhopadhyay when she became chief minister, was arrested, suspended from his job in Jadavpur University. People are being actually killed for voting for a certain party in local elections and statewide elections in state of West Bengal. What is happening in state of Tamil Nadu and Kerala is nothing better. So when we talk about Indian democracy, the sorry plight of human rights, we need to understand law and order in India is a state subject. State governments are responsible, and sometimes rather than generalizing, we need to take much more nuanced, much more granular viewpoint about state of affairs. My next question goes to Dr. Anju Preet. You mentioned about, democracy is of the people, for the people, by the people, and that is generally very good definition of democracy. One of the basic tenets of democracy is one person, one vote. Now, if that is the sacrosanct tenet, which democracy is more democratic? Indian democracy, which follows one person, one vote, or US democracy, which does not follow that tenet?
Okay, so I think both of these they follow the same tenet: one person, one vote, to a certain extent. But I would like to speak. That's a really very deep question, and I may not be able to answer it accurately or as per you are asking. See, American voter is educated, but then it becomes you decide between just two two parties. There are just like two parties things, Republican or Democrat. And personally, I like the system of US, like when you come to decide the president or the head of the government, where within the party different people they come during the primaries, and then they present their views directly to the people. People are educated, and they're aware who they are voting for, and then they pick up the head of the party, like that is chosen by the people. But in India, it's like, okay, they go for a party, and even they may fight the elections on the name of someone. Like it happened in Maharashtra, the state elections were fought in the name of the Prime Minister Modi by this coalition government between Uddhav Thackeray and BJP. But then after that, the they joined hands with the Congress, and this person was ruled out. So that kind of democracy I personally don't like. So people have to be educated, and when they are educated, then they vote. And any kind of um, coalitions after the elections, should not be allowed at all, because they may have
Thank
those
you, Dr.
mental.
Anjupreet. You are talking about parliamentary form of democracy
Yes,
that is being practiced in India, and it is presidential system in US.
right.
Just for sake of clarification, in last 20 years, there were two presidents who did not gain popular votes.
Yes,
So one person, one vote is a sacrosanct tenet. You don't allow smoke-filled rooms by, operatives, manipulative operatives, you know, in the background deciding who becomes the president. So
but
that was the conceptual question: which democracy is more democratic in
I
terms
would,
of representational?
in representational form, I would say the Indian parliamentary form of democracy is more democratic.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Anjupreet. My next question goes to Mr. Avtans Kumar, and you have already talked about introducing newer concepts, dharma-based democracy, and things like that. And I think some of the panelists also did talk about, India being the largest democracy and United States being the oldest democracy. These are like journalistic cliches, and we hear them all the time. But uh, what is that doctrinal inexactitude with this cliche that India is the largest democracy and United States is the oldest democracy? Because it's a flawed expression. And since you talked about history and all, I really want to hear your views on that.
Yes, in the sense, uh, the U.S. is the oldest democracy, as is said, because in the modern sense, the Western sense of how we understand democracy. But then we also say that India has been, like I mentioned in my initial remarks, that India has been a pluralistic society for a longest time, and with the ekam sat vipravoda vadanti and other things, just it's inbuilt in the system. Even in the when we look at the Indian knowledge tradition, we have such a vast and a long tradition of knowledge that has a long discussions and the disputations and all that, and then within that it evolves and it becomes a school of thought. We have the definitely have the oldest and one of the oldest democracy if we look at in an overall sense. But if I, with your permission, I quickly like to address a couple of things here that previous panelists have mentioned. Uh, we talk about U.S. democracy and the freedom of expression, and I would like to just bring a few things into picture here. Uh, the censorship that we have had recently in the U.S. When you talk about the COVID, when we talk about the January 6th, when we talk about Hunter Biden's laptop, when we talk about Twitter files. What happened to the freedom of expression? Recently, a Blaze journalist was taken taken by the FBI just for reporting on January 6th. Look at the kind of democracy we have. We are trying to get rid of a political opponent by judicial maneuvering or weaponizing the judicial system. What
Thank
happened in
you, you
Canada?
made your point. We will bring that discussion later on. But just to be on the record, I have a couple of academic articles here. There's an article by Professor Thomas Troutman, who is professor of history and anthropology at University of Michigan, and the title of the paper is India's Place in History of Democracy. And if I read the abstract, the idea of Athens as the mother of democracy was pushed by modern scholars of ancient Greece and Rome. Ancient Greek and Rome writers on India themselves found several similarities with political structures in the subcontinent. So the point I'm making is that US is not the oldest democracy. In Western Hemisphere, ancient Rome and ancient Greek were ancient Athens were the models of democracy. But in Indian context, a number of scholars are finding that Indian systems of governance in even the Vedic time were democratic and republican. There's another paper, Democracy in Ancient India by Professor Steve Mullberger, Associate Professor of History at Nipissing University. And again, he talks about democracy in ancient India. If you look at Rig Veda, in Rigvedic time, there were republics. These were called Ganas and Sanghas, and they were
Absolutely.
bicameral legislatures that were called Sabhas and Samitis. And I would encourage all my panelists to read these academic articles so that we do not get dissuaded and blindsided by one sided propaganda that democracy is alien to India, democracy is in danger. Actually, democracy is in the DNA of Mother India if we look at in a more crucial manner. Now, Avtansji talked about, I don't know whether it was Avtansji or somebody who talked about Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. I may actually cite from Rigveda, Samgachadhvam samvadadhvam samvo manansi janatam deva bhagam yatha purve sanjanana upasate samano mantra samitihi samani samanam manah sahachitte mesham samanam mantrabhimantraye va saman menana wo havisha juhomi समानी व आकुति समाना हृदया निवह समानमस्तु वो मनो यथा वह सुसहासति. Now this is actually saying that you have to be in unison with everyone. You cannot neglect anyone, not even a single section of the society. We have to talk about welfare of everyone. So civilizationally, Indian ethos is highly democratic. And there were republics that actually the current prime minister talks about. So we should not be actually blindsided by the pseudo scientific Western propaganda, which always tries to bring Indian system of governance. I asked our host to put a graphic, and that graphic is democracy around the world. And if our panelists and our audience carefully look at that graphic that tells you about the level of democracy around the world by a calculated index, you will find that US gets score of 7.85, and it is actually considered a flawed democracy, and India gets a score of 6.91. They are not very far apart. The systems are different, so we don't understand. One is a federation, second is a union of state. One is presidential form of government. The other is a Westminster type parliamentary democracy. One has an electoral system, other has first past the votes system. So those are the nuances, but we need to understand those nuances rather than actually indulge in some kind of uh, you know unaware propaganda. So I guess we are coming to an end of our time. We really had 1 hour and we are coming to that time period. I will only say at the end, democracy is very messy. Democracy is very complicated. Democracy is an exercise in learning and evolution. And if you look at all the countries, they are all struggling to find the most perfect system of democracy in their own socio-cultural context. To transpose certain alien concepts on a particular democracy and not take into consideration the local nuances. And that's why I brought the states of Tamil Nadu, states of West Bengal, and state of Kerala, where there's no freedom of expression, where people are being slaughtered, women are being raped for voting a particular party, and local leaders going on the media saying that the central forces will be gone after the elections are held. We shall deal with you. What is happening in Sandesh Khali is a telling representation of democracy at the state level. So before we start blaming India as a nation, just because our political viewpoints do not actually are in unison with the current government, I think that does not behoove us. Mother India is going to survive because democracy is in the DNA of India. There will always be a losing party. There will always be a losing side. There will be loony people who will always cite Dominion voting system or whatever. But matter of the fact is that democracy is the only viable governance system in a pluralistic, diverse, subcontinent size country like India. And I have no qualms and I have no illusions. Democracy is going to survive, will continue to survive. We had a 1.5 year of aberration when democracy was actually jailed, murdered, if you may say, during the emergency. But we have never repeated that experiment ever again. And that's not likely to happen. Whoever may come back to power in May 2024 elections, my thanks to my distinguished panelists, Mr. Avtans Kumar, Mr. Yashwant Raj, Mr. Satish Jha, and Dr. Anju Preet. Namaskar, and thanks a lot for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ji. Namaskar.
Yeah, I would, on behalf of AIPF, Shekhar Tiwari ji is also there. We would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to all of you for taking your time. As you can see, it was a very, very intense and passionate discussion. And due to shortage of time, we couldn't respond to those questions. But we will do come back with another program of a similar nature that will address all those questions. Thank you so much. Please do like us on our YouTube and Facebook so that we'll be able to do more. Thank you.
Thank you so much.